It's a pleasure to be here with you guys today, and we're looking forward to having a great conversation with Dave Helmly of Adobe and Larry O'Connor of OWC. Larry and Dave, how are you doing?
Hey, we're doing great, man. Thanks for having us out.
No complaints. Appreciate being on, and also glad the weather got a little nicer here in Texas.
So the Apple M1 has arrived, and obviously there's quite a bit of buzz behind it. Today we're going to try to see what OWC is doing as far as it relates to its technology and bringing the Thunderbolt 4 technology and making sure it plays nicely with the M1. And obviously Adobe is getting all their video apps up to speed on the M1, and we're really looking forward to seeing how those integrations are going to go. And, I have questions for Dave, so definitely we can begin to see how the apps are going to perform. And I always have to ask the question: is there a complete rewrite going to happen on Premiere Pro? Probably not, but we'll see. But today we're going to get going with Larry. So Larry is going to give us an overview of what he is doing, and then we're going to go into some Q&A. Larry?
Certainly. For the M1 and actually for the entire Mac line, we're really excited about bringing Thunderbolt 4 products today. And it's not so much that Thunderbolt 4 is new, so much as it brings on new features. And big time kudos to Apple for enabling Thunderbolt 4 compatibility, which is really a new chipset, a new capability set, but enabling that compatibility with all their Intel Macs that are equipped with Thunderbolt 3 ports. So everything from 2016 up to the latest M1s can take advantage of our new Thunderbolt hubs and Thunderbolt 4 docks that allow you to have more Thunderbolt ports on your computer, making it easier to plug in bus part accessories, displays, whatever it may be, without having to count or worry about how many ports you still have open. It's the very first time that we can have more Thunderbolt ports added to a Mac. The M1 and Thunderbolt 4 devices all require OS 11. That's beyond OS 11. It's plug and play and go. So everything we've been building for the last, for Thunderbolt 3 for the last 5+ years, Thunderbolt in general with an adapter for really the last decade, connects not just to the Thunderbolt 3 machines with Intel, but also to these new M1 Macs. So there's already a huge selection of devices, external storage, 10 gigabit adapters. eGPU is the only thing you can't put on an M1 Mac, but docks and just about everything imaginable is already ready to plug and play and go with the new M1 Macs.
So pretty much you've already integrated with all the... Are you at 100% with the M1 right now, or you still have some work to do?
As of this exact moment, we're still in the process of updating a driver for our LTO to be fully M1 compatible. That's right around the corner. The only other minor challenge right now is with soft rate in the M1, and that's very short. Actually, we're in beta with the driver for M1 right now. When we release something in beta, it's actually production ready. The official application, soft rate, which has complete updates for the M1, the Apple Silicon architecture, is a couple weeks away from full release. We have provided M1 support for soft rate. It's going back to November. We don't mess around with data. More of this is application and user interface and user experience, as opposed to anything that affects data.
So Dave, what is Adobe doing currently to make sure all the video apps are ready to go?
Yeah, Larry, we might get you to mute the mic just so it looks like a little feedback on your end. Maybe that's a little better, George. So yeah, much like what Larry was saying, I mean, there's a lot of things changing. Apple is providing, lots of different updates and changes for not only software vendors, but certainly hardware vendors. I mean, I'll just add on for my workflow and then get into a little bit of obviously what we're doing at Adobe. That things like Thunderbolt raids and other things like this, there are components that are constantly being updated as new libraries and other key components of the OS are getting optimized. And I think that's probably the word of the day. And certainly when it comes to our software and George, if we get time, we can certainly jump into a screen share and kind of show what the M1's doing. It's pretty impressive. And what we're really spending 90% of our time doing on a daily basis, and we are checking in several times a week with various reports on how's dynamic link doing, how's this component doing, that component. We did have an internal component for Premiere that handles a lot of the H.264, H.265 was just updated to an all optimized M1 code base, which is really important because you got to remember that a lot of software, and it's not just Adobe, it's other software vendors out there. The software that you see might come as Premiere, After Effects, or even Photoshop is multiple programs running. So when you bring up a plugin or a certain panel or something of the program, you're actually calling on some additional code most of the time within the application. So each one of those sections have to be optimized. And if you happen to be on the current beta, so remember, anybody out there with a Creative Cloud subscription has the ability to click on the left-hand side, click on beta apps, and you can run the betas on the same system that you're running your shipping version on and test it out. And currently today, Premiere Pro, Audition, and Media Encoder will all come up as Apple Silicon if you do a get properties on the software application. Just click on the application and do a get info, and it'll tell you, is it using Intel or not. You might have noticed that I left out After Effects, which I think is important. After Effects is getting optimized right now for multi-threading. It's currently turned on in the beta, so I would encourage anyone out there, if you're an After Effects user, you've been running on one thread for all these years. In some cases, you might run a little more optimized than that in certain areas of After Effects. But today, I'm on my MacBook Pro 16-inch, awesome machine with eight cores, and I can just kind of watch these threads, 16 threads come up, and it's amazing because After Effects are just banging out on each one of those. So I have been running After Effects on the M1, and I currently have a Mac Mini 16 gig machine. Very impressed by it. It keeps right up with the Intel. So, you can't really compare what the M1's doing to, say, the Core i9, which is what's in my Intel laptop, my MacBook 16, because I just think the technology, the way the processors work, the memory requirements, things are very different with M1, and we have to start getting used to what that environment looks like. It's very hard to compare these different chips on an equal playing ground, other than which one's faster in which particular situation. So George, it gets pretty hairy, but at the end of the day, it's like, for this much money that I've spent, what can this machine do for me? And can I save any time? And I'm completely blown away with what I've seen on these first level machines that Apple's introduced. It's absolutely impressive. And again, happy to share some screenshots with you, or some screen share.
All right, so let's do a little bit. Let's do a few questions, and the first one I'm gonna get to, this person that sent it in is kind of jumping forward to the MacBook Pro, but obviously security questions. The person said, I've read Apple is experiencing security issues with the M1 chip. What can we expect from the M1 chip when the new MacBook Pro is released later this year? Obviously, that person is kind of looking forwardly, but how are you guys dealing with security and making sure that this is going to, for your end of things, that we're going to be secured?
Larry, I'll let you go first, because there's a lot of concern probably just around hardware and things like that.
On the hardware side, there's independent systems that certainly keep Thunderbolt extremely secure. There's every once in a while an article pops up, in particular talks about Thunderbolt security, and Apple has had exceptional security implemented with Thunderbolt, going back more than half a decade. So while some of these things only became standard on the PC side recently, and when I say standard, more along the lines of it being a requirement, and speak a little bit more to Thunderbolt 4. Thunderbolt 4 means a lot more to a PC platform user, a Windows platform, from the point of view that Thunderbolt 4 guarantees that things like security, support for video, power delivery, 40 gigabit total performance, and some other capabilities are always present if the machine is designated Thunderbolt 4. On the Mac side, we've always had everything that our Macs have been capable of providing over Thunderbolt, Apple has implemented, and security has not been a real issue, a real threat on the Mac for a very long time. And when it was seen as a potential threat or an open door, Apple very early on and quickly closed it.
Yeah, I think I would agree. Apple seems to be on it. I mean, it's not even just with the M1. I think it's just life in general in today's times. And certainly at Adobe, we've had to worry about, in the past, we had to worry about Flash. In the past, we had to worry about Acrobat. Of course, in the present, we have to worry about Acrobat. Anytime there's a way to sort of package things and stuff it in there, someone's going to look at that. The other thing is I do think there's just a lot of headline grabbing too, George. When I read a lot of these things and you really start, getting into it a lot, it's like, okay, what exactly did they uncover? And a lot of times I kind of commend Apple for not saying anything, because if there's nothing to say, there's nothing to say, right? I mean, it would be interesting if someone actually discovered what's really going on here. So for me, I think it's a little bit of an unknown. But I just go back to what Larry was saying on Thunderbolt security, because it's a great example. On Windows, and nice thing about Mac is they kind of do this for you automatically. You have to authenticate the devices. There are strict security settings that you have to go into the BIOS and say, when I connect a Thunderbolt device, what should this do? And then you can say, auto or enable, disable, authenticate, automatically authenticate or whatever. Or there's software controls once you're in the OS. So again, Larry, let me know if you have anything to add. But to me, it just seems it's very automatic on the Mac side. We don't ever have to worry about that. You just kind of connect it and go.
So, Larry, you're muted. Hey, Larry, you're muted.
To say, today is, for the most part, as long as you know what you're connecting to your system and don't ignore, pretty loud warnings that often get presented if there's something that doesn't look quite right. You have a pretty good probability of staying pretty safe and secure. And on the Mac, there's more stuff that's theoretically presented. Most of the headlines now, Silver Sparrow is an exception, and they're not even sure what that does, and it's pretty limited in terms of how many machines they believe were affected by this or could have some effect from this, and Apple's already addressing it. But in general, I would say 90, and this goes for Thunderbolt and goes for most things, 95% of the headlines, certainly on the Mac side that we see, are theoretical versus a case where there's actually been any kind of infection or mass population or something that could cause issue. But always be vigilant. Do not take it for granted.
Exactly. It's nothing you can ignore, but I just think if you're operating safely on your computer, like we all know we should, and Adobe spends a lot of time training its employees on how to recognize certain things, as I'm sure, Larry, you guys do it with your own team at OWC as well. You got to be able to kind of look at things and question things, and it's just a part of life. But I do like the fact that sometimes large companies don't give these things immediate headlines. And I know there's always a group of people that think, they're not telling us enough. It's like, well, they probably don't have enough to tell you right now. So you're better just to do your own homework and just relax and compute safely and get on with your way.
Well, I think what we're seeing on our end, obviously, there's a lot going on in the industry. I spent a lot of time on Alex Lindsay's office hours, and I know a lot of us are using M1s. I'm still waiting to get a Mac Mini M1. But obviously, there are folks like us, whether we're doing, not necessarily on the post-production side or production side, we're doing live streams. So with these new Mac Minis, we could get a 8x8, 8 gigs, 8 RAM, and still be able to use them one-to-one for Zoom. So, it depends on your use case and what you're using it for. Yeah. So with anything else, you're going to have a lot of noise. Our industry is very noisy right now across the board. So, you have that also. So, Dave, let me jump to Premier.
I was going to add one thing to that, George. Sorry to interrupt. You mentioned that, certainly the 8 gig max, right, on the M1s. Mm-hmm. So you can't look at these things exactly the same way, but neither can a software vendor. So one of the things we're doing on the M1, which is why it's going to remain in beta just a little bit longer. We're very close. to where we're very comfortable. We've had to go in and optimize lots of parts of the program with M1 code and basically say, how small can we get this so we can run the application as tightly as possible and still give you the functionality that you expect. That's kind of where it's differing than on the Intel side. So some things that we have to go in and continue to optimize. And Larry, I'll throw it back out to you. You're having to do the same thing with drivers and other things, right? You're muted. Sorry,
You're muted.
Everything is new with the M1, and this is really how code used to be written for all practical purposes. But certainly smaller, tighter is better. And Apple gives, the M1 has got such a rich toolbox as well. It's just different.
Yeah, and I'll add that I've gotten great feedback from some of the engineers that I work with. That a lot of the tools are there. Apple's been great as far as response goes. So it's been a really good collaboration with the software companies, especially with us. Apple's done just a great job. I think we can all admit, because I think we've all been together for so long. I know Larry and I have known each other for eons. If we go back to even PowerPC, System 7 Savvy, all the sort of things that I knew I'd get a smile out of you, Larry, System 7. But as we sort of went through these steps with an Apple, the M1 to me has got to be one of the most impressive launches I've ever seen, as far as just being able to deliver something at holiday time, picking a machine like a Mac Mini, like a MacBook Air, just a MacBook in general, and then deliver that and have a lot of this software run on it, even things like, World of Warcraft and other things that people are going to be running around that time. It pretty much went off without a hitch. There's always hiccups kind of here and there, but I think we can all agree it was amazing. And I was running, obviously at that time, it wasn't even optimized when we first got it. We didn't really get our first generation of Premiere out till late December. But anyway, George, just to say, I'm very happy and very impressed on how this has gone. And to that one person's comment, kind of talking about the future, because I think we all know better than to kind of second guess Apple, but they're kind of headed down this path. I am very excited to kind of see what's next, right? It's going to be amazing.
So let's jump into a Premiere Adobe question here. So this comes from Ansel in New York City, which is a friend of mine. And he always beats me up because I'm always introducing him to new things. And when it breaks, he gets mad at me. So he says, currently I'm running Premiere Pro version 14.9, running on a 2019 iMac Mojave. I purchased a 13-inch MacBook Pro M1, which is running Big Sur. Will I be able to move edits back and forth on both machines?
Great question. So first of all, one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing is recommend that you run the latest Mac OS. Now, if he's running Big Sur, obviously that's the latest. Apple's always updating those drivers. Of course, on the M1 you have to, but on his iMac, I would tell him, to get to version, 11 Big Sur when he can. It's been great for me. Once you figure out, that you're kind of locked out of the root level and you've got some things where you have to move things into your user folder and you figure that out. It's been very stable for me. Now, the reason I mention that is because we're really only looking to support the last two major revs of something like Apple operating system and even Windows for that matter, meaning that we're only going to go back so far because there's so many driver changes coming out that Apple will do that optimizes lots of things. And the M1 is no exception, and probably even more so, that if they've done something for Thunderbolt or they've done something for display, which pretty much happens every release on the display side, we attach to that, and that's an optimized driver for us that just makes our applications work that much better. Now, as far as projects go, for his direct question, what we've done is with version 14, you can move that up and down anywhere within the 14 family. So CC 2020, for example, and a little bit of 2021. The next version obviously will be 15. So our goal will be, so long as you go to 15 and as we change 15, any 15 version, you'll be able to go up or down. So 15.5, 15.4, whatever the numbers work out to be. Now, One change that's important to point out when he's using the beta is we have a whole new closed captioning and subtitling, just caption system. There's a brand new track setting where you have audio tracks, video tracks, and now you have transcription track or captions track, I should say. And transcription, by the way, is coming as well. So the captions track adds an entirely new type of project file. So that's the main reason you won't be able to go backwards, is because we've added a major new component. And we're not trying to introduce too many of those. We have lots of great ideas because we don't want to break project compatibility up and down. So I hope that answers this question. So 15 needs to stay within the 15 family, 14 needs to stay within the 14 family.
Excellent. So he did, we chatted last night for a little while. He did want me to let him know that what he found, that moving from the iMac to the MacBook Pro 13, there was lag on playback. But when he created a project on the M1 and brought it back to the iMac, everything seemed to work fine. So obviously there's going to be a little bit of growing pains in between the versions.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with lag and things like that, a lot of times we can figure that out. It really depends on the media that he's using, because, and again, is he using an 8 gig system or a 16? Right now, and I have talked to even some friends of mine at Apple, there is a better experience for video editing, again, depending on the type of project you have, if you have 16. Absolutely makes all the difference in the world. When the application launches, it could take up to 5 gigs of memory, right? Just depending on what's available. The OS needs a little bit of elbow room, any extra drivers. If you're running an AJA or a Blackmagic or a Bluefish output, anything like that, all those are taking up resources. 8 gig is really tight. So I don't know if that's what he's running, but that would be an example where you may start to see a little bit of lag. And this goes back to my previous comment that all the software vendors, including us, and even Larry had mentioned it on the driver's side, we have to go in and rethink and re-optimize using some of these new tools that Apple has given us.
So Larry, let's turn to you for a little bit here. So I know you and I have had this discussion about cables. I'm going to go to 2 questions. So how are Thunderbolt 4 cables different from Thunderbolt 3 cables? And the second one is, how is Thunderbolt 4 different from Thunderbolt 3? And I know it might sound mundane, but it's important because you're using cables and you have to know what cables, is right for your particular workflow.
Sure. To take the cable question first and try to make it as quick and simple as possible. A Thunderbolt 4 cable is absolutely universal for anything that connects from C to C, from a USB-C port to a USB-C port. So whether you have a Thunderbolt 3 device, a Thunderbolt 4 device, any USB device, even a charger, where it goes from a Type-C port to a device with Type-C, a Thunderbolt 4 cable will always work for whatever the power rating, for whatever the data rating, whatever the interface rating. It is a 100% universal cable. Now, a Type-C to C USB cable, may be 10 gigabit, it might be 5 gigabit, it might only provide USB 2 speeds. You don't know what the wattage support is necessarily. It might be good for up to 30, 60. Hopefully it's good for up to 100 watts if you're going to try to connect it to something that needs that higher wattage. But there isn't the kind of control in the USB space for what a USB cable can do. A lot of USB cables aren't even marked. But if you have a Thunderbolt 4 cable, it doesn't matter what you connect it to. This is somewhat similar in the case of the shorter Thunderbolt 3 cables. Any Thunderbolt 3 cable that's less than 0.8 meters is also universal for anything that's Type-C. But on the go forward, Thunderbolt 4 just gives you universal peace of mind. Whatever the length of the cable, it doesn't matter. Even longer Thunderbolt 3 cables don't necessarily work at full capability for USB-C. They'll always power, but not necessarily provide the data. So there's a lot of, it can be very confusing when you reach into a drawer and grab what you think is a C2C cable to connect a device, or worse, you're in the middle of a project or you're on the road and you go and you connect something and you don't get full speed, you don't get full capability. You wonder why half the ports on maybe it's a USB-C dock, why they're not working. And you think, hey, this is a really high quality cable. Apple's C2C cable is extremely high quality, but it's a charging cable. And for data, it gives you USB 2 speeds, regardless of what it does for the power side. So for the cable, Thunderbolt 4, if it's an OWC Thunderbolt 4 cable, it does not matter what you're connecting. It will always connect and give you the maximum capability of the device along with the host. And then Thunderbolt 3 versus Thunderbolt 4, I'll try to keep it super short. I mean, I guess the primary way to look at it is kind of to a certain degree, it's a marketing standard. Every time there's a new Thunderbolt chipset, we have required, when I say we, in general, an OS update's been necessary to enable certain features and firmware and drivers to utilize a new Thunderbolt chipset. Thunderbolt 4 is really an extension, really is technically a new Thunderbolt 3 chipset, and that's actually not even the right way to kind of put it. What's in Thunderbolt 4 is a Thunderbolt 3 chipset. Thunderbolt 4 really became something that defined a set of marketing requirements. And in the case of a Thunderbolt 4 PC, where you really have the most being defined for the first time, everything that Apple's always put on the Macs, a PC with Thunderbolt 4 has to have. Thunderbolt 4 also requires 8K video. It requires security. It requires full 40 gigabit performance. And these are all things on the PC side of the fence that were not being defined before Thunderbolt 4 came along. On a Thunderbolt 3 PC, you may or may not have power delivery support. You may be 20 gigabits or 40 gigabits. You may or may not have video capabilities. There's a lot of things that were variable on the PC side of the fence on a Windows machine before Thunderbolt 4 came and defined everything. For a Mac user, everybody who has a Type-C port already had and built into those Macs all the capabilities that Thunderbolt 3 was able to provide. And even now with having a Thunderbolt 4, the biggest feature with Thunderbolt 4 on the peripheral side being this capability of having more Thunderbolt ports. With something like the OWC Thunderbolt Hub or our dock, you plug in one device to one Thunderbolt port, and now you can have up to another 4 devices, Thunderbolt devices, connected to that for direct connection without having the daisy chain. And that's a new chipset feature, and Apple's enabled all those features with OS 11. So if you're a Mac user, you just need to know you need OS 11 or later. And on the PC side, it just eliminates so many headaches and questions as to just what capabilities you actually would have between two different PCs, that otherwise had Thunderbolt Type-C. So I hope that kind of answers. The Thunderbolt 4 naming is really designed to simplify and standardize and make it very clear that the capabilities are present, whereas before, there were certainly questions as to what you may or may not have.
So Larry, I'm going to stay with you for a second. So you just mentioned Thunderbolt 4. A few things about Thunderbolt 4. And obviously, you have this sweet little Thunderbolt hub, not a Docker hub. Obviously, there's a lot of folks and a couple of my colleagues that have them. But again, Dave's got one.
Thanks, Dave.
You need to be on Big Sur to run to utilize this dock, correct?
Correct. And just like when Titan Ridge came out, it required a new Mac OS version to fully enable the capabilities of that chipset. Now, I consider the Thunderbolt 4, but what makes Thunderbolt 4 is a new Thunderbolt 3 chipset for all practical purposes. And Thunderbolt 4, it basically promises that all the capabilities are promised. We have support for 8K video, for example, in Titan Ridge, but it was it's Thunderbolt 4 that guarantees that capability is enabled. And I also, just for a second, wanted to touch base on the 8 gig versus 16 gig. More memory has always made a big difference in systems, and especially in these new M1s where the memory is soldered, you don't have the opportunity to upgrade later. Highly recommend you get the 16 gigabyte equipped systems. Both for the long-term performance, the long-term value of those machines. At some point, you probably wish you had more memory, no matter how efficient we get these applications. And the other aspect, less memory means more paging. There's some questions right now about how the memory, I should say, the SSDs are being used in the M1s and the write to those systems. So more memory also reduces, it should extend the longevity of your SSD and reduce the unnecessary writes through memory paging.
Excellent. So Dave, let's jump back.
I'll ask Larry a question because he's given us lots of solutions at Adobe that when we thought we were locked out of different options inside. I know RAM is one thing we can't really fix that problem. If it turns out to be a problem later, again, we're going to do everything we can do to optimize to make these things work on as little as possible. But I agree 100% with Larry. But you guys have done an amazing job with like the Aurora series. I've used those in my MacBook. My original 11-inch MacBook Air, which I treasure because it's just like an iPad that runs Mac OS. It's awesome. Still works today. It's got a 1 terabyte Aurora in there, right? And it's been amazing. I mean, it's just like there was a little upgrade kit came in there. We kind of did what we were able to do, and I think the most you could get out of that thing was 512 at the time. So you guys have always had an amazing track record to me about giving us upgrade options. When it comes to something like the M1, are you guys, even thinking about if we got it with 256 and even some of the laptops, is there not something that could attach in a case or something, like if it was a MacBook Air? Mac Mini is probably a little easier to solve because you could do it with a dock. But if you had a laptop, because I do have a bunch of friends, the reason I'm asking this, I had a bunch of friends that purchased the little 256 version and kind of wish they didn't. Right, because by the time they start syncing photos and their phones got more memory than their laptop in some cases, right? So you always wonder, is it hard to like make the bottom of a case or something where it could attach where it's still portable?
We actually have a project that's been in progress for a few years now, and there's just a lot that continues, unfortunately, to take away. We have the ADEC project, which actually is a case that attaches to the bottom of these Apple laptops. We also have a CaseBite product actually shipping right now. It's a simpler product. It clips on again to the bottom of currently in this machine, lets you have up to another 1 terabyte available through a semi-integrated external attachment. For the Mac Mini, we have our Mini Stack right now. We have some updates coming to the Mini Stack that will, I would say, even enhance it further. It is unfortunate that there's no internal upgradability for these machines, but with Thunderbolt, it's really easy and fast to add very high performance and high capacity storage externally.
Well, I just know if there's a way to do it, you're the first place I look, because I'm like, if anyone's figured it out, and you guys have a great track record that it just works, right? So it's like it's well thought out. I was going to add one thing, George, is we have been getting some Thunderbolt 4 cables in. I've got one here. It's a little short, but it has a number on it that says 4. So Larry, I didn't know if you want to talk about that to help with a little bit of the confusion. And just because it had a Thunderbolt 3 on the old ones, that's not exactly the same as having a Thunderbolt 4. It's not one better. It's a different spec.
The Thunderbolt 4, our cables will say Thunderbolt 4. Actually do say, I shouldn't say will. They do say Thunderbolt 4. They also indicate the 100 watts, just so you know that they're safe and supportive of up to 100 watts of power delivery. But a Thunderbolt 4 cable and a Thunderbolt 3 cable both provide 40 gigabits for Thunderbolt. Where Thunderbolt 4 differs is that it also guarantees full 100% support for all modes of USB. Shorter Thunderbolt 3 cables do provide support for up to 10 gigabits of USB data, but longer Thunderbolt 3 cables that are active, they're full 40 gigabits for Thunderbolt, but then they drop down to USB 2 speeds if you try to use that cable to connect direct from a host to a USB-C system. When it says Thunderbolt 4, you don't even have to think about it. If it fits the port, it supports whatever that device and host can do together. It will never slow down a device. It will never reduce power. It will never give you issues where something isn't quite working right and you wonder why, because, you have USB cables that look just like Thunderbolt cables, but you plug a USB cable into a Thunderbolt device, it usually doesn't work at all. If you plug a USB cable that's for charging into a USB-C data device or a USB-C dock, it may work at a very low speed, or it might only half work. The number one tech support issue we have with Type-C devices come from what cable somebody's connected. And just because a cable looks like it's a super high quality, top of the line cable, doesn't mean that it has the capabilities enabled, and doesn't even mean that it necessarily is a great cable. There's generic cables that use low grade, conductors inside. They have a thick housing. They have a good feel to them, but that doesn't make that cable. That doesn't even make that cable safe to use for power. So Thunderbolt 4, if every Thunderbolt product, including cables, are 100% certified. They have to go through Apple and Intel certification and approval for production. So when we ship these cables, we don't just get to, randomly select. Not that we ever would, but there's not a variance in how we're allowed to produce these. These are to a very tight specification that's been certified and approved, which is a couple steps. I mean, we self-certify on our USB cables. There isn't this overarching requirement by an outside body to do the same for USB, and that's across all USB. In the case of Thunderbolt, in addition to the the brand recognition and the trust you have in who you're having the cable provided by, it also has to go through certification. And in terms of whether it's mission critical, getting your work done, and just knowing that it's safe, knowing that it's going to work. If it says Thunderbolt 4, if it says TB4, it always will work if you're connecting anything that's got a C port to another device with a C port.
Yeah, and I noticed that I just set up, I have two Dell 40-inch ultra-wide displays in front of me, which have Thunderbolt on. They came with a Thunderbolt 4 cable in the box, which is really interesting. So I started looking at that and say, that's obviously going to be a thing now. So it's pretty awesome. So it is taking over quickly.
And before,
it just eliminates so much headache, because it's so easy to grab a cable that looks like the right cable, with those universal C ports, those C connectors, and then you connect it all up and you wonder why things aren't working the way you expect them to work.
Yeah.
So before we move on to the next question, also, I suspect that all of the cables on Amazon are not made equal. So I guess we need to be careful with that also.
Yeah, I'd be really capable buying a lot of cables on Amazon. In fact,
right,
even with the Thunderbolt 4, some of the early issues were from USB 4 cables that weren't certified.
So
I'll add one thing, George, is on those cables, because I certainly went through some of that, and I've had a lot of OWC cables over the years. I love the fact that you guys make them in all different colors, which help me kind of track things behind my monitor. If I've got things plugged in, where is this one going? Where is that going? So, yellow, red, blue, green, whatever color you want. So I hope you guys continue to do that. I find it very, very, very helpful for me. But I will tell you, on some of the cheaper cables, it's a lot of times the cables just go bad, like lightning cables, where you're just pulling on them and they're just not built that great. So that's another thing. So if you buy a cheap lightning cable, it doesn't last very long. And I found Thunderbolt cables, which obviously you're constantly connecting things and disconnecting things, especially when you're traveling. They're definitely not all made equal, for sure.
So Dave, just a reminder, folks that are watching, if you would like any of your questions answered by Dave or Larry, you could text it to 202-875-5255. We're not hoarding numbers. As soon as this event is over, the message will go poof. All right. So if you have questions, you go ahead and text them in. Okay. So Dave, this question came by email from Steve. So M1 Big Sur dual display. Going to try CC on late 2020 MacBook Air, but cannot get dock from Air to a large NEC display. Why? How?
So on our apps, if the Mac supports it, right, we'll support it. But keep in mind, when you're using two displays, you're taking a lot more resources. That's a lot of pixels you're pushing. If you've got each monitor set, these monitors I have in front of me are full 5K displays. You have two of those displays connected. That's a lot of pixels to be pushing. And we're already talking about these systems having, limited resources that need to be optimized, right? But our applications work, will work fine. If the Mac sees both displays and everything's working, ours will come up fine. So you can have a second monitor with your, full screen out, or you can just have two desktop spaces. I would tell you that you might want to experiment with any sort of odd latency just by reducing the resolution. Just reduce the amount of pixels you're pushing out. So start with 1920 1080. Might not be the greatest picture if you have some of these newer displays, like, Apple's got their new XDR, which is a pretty amazing display. Just start bringing some of those down and saying, okay, let me just see where this starts to cry uncle. And that's kind of what I do. I try to figure out where the sweet spot is. But if the Finder can see it, the Mac OS can see it, then our apps can see it.
So, Dave,
So I hope that answers Steve's question.
why don't I stay with you for a second, Dave? Let's bang through some of these questions. So, when will, and this comes from the Adobe Help Desk. So, when will Adobe release apps that run natively on computers with M1 chip?
Very soon. So it kind of depends. It depends on the app. One of the things that's holding up Premiere right now, just to be honest, is we're testing dynamic link. So After Effects is going to come later, hopefully not too much later, but a little later after after Meet Encoder Audition and Premiere, just because we're finishing up the multi-threading. If you've got, even some of the older Macs with dual Xeons or anything that can run the latest OS, I guess maybe the dual Xeon ones couldn't, but on other platforms, we have to make sure that After Effects is completely optimized before we start turning all the attention onto M1. Now, there is M1 work going on with After Effects. It's just that they've kind of pulling double duty here. And the first thing we want to ensure is that the dynamic link module is working exactly the way that people would expect. And if you don't know what that is, that allows you to have a live After Effects composition on the Premiere Pro timeline. So we need to make sure that that's working. But I would say, just continue with the betas. One of the things that is good to point out, we try to update the beta weekly, if that sort of gives you a time frame of when you want to know what's happening to the M1, because the M1 beta is not on the same schedule as, say, the Intel. So it kind of knows what system you're running on for when it updates. So just keep that in mind, that if your friend has an Intel or you have two machines, you're running the beta on both, the Intel machine may get more updates than the M1, because as we get more code and we do more optimization in concert with Apple, because we do work very closely with Apple on this, we make changes. And again, we try to get those out weekly. So our goal for sure is, and I hate to be that guy, but it's obviously 2021, but it's progressing extremely fast. So I don't think it'll be too much longer. But I will say we're going to continue to optimize. Performance and reliability are extremely important to us. We've spent a lot of cycles on this. You see the new system compatibility report that we've put out to try to give gauges. Now, I think it's a little less problematic on a Mac OS, because it's a much more controlled environment when it comes to GPUs and drivers and these types of things, as say Windows, where you get more options for how you run. So it tends to be a bit better. So anyway, I'm excited by all the components. I get a weekly report every Friday on the status of M1, what the engineering team built that week, what they did, and usually first thing Monday morning while I'm having my coffee, I'm running it through the paces, and I'm very happy with what I'm seeing now. So I do want to encourage anyone listening to make sure that you're getting up on Creative Cloud, clicking on the beta app on your M1 machine, and downloading the M1 apps and take them for a spin. I think you'll be impressed.
So one quick little one here. Installing plugins on M1. How are we doing? Any issues with plugins?
There's always going to be issues with plugins anytime, because plugins will, probably, I should say obvious, it's going to require you to update those plugins for M1 code, right? Because remember, the plugins may be GPU optimized, and they're going to be GPU optimized for AMD OpenCL. So they may run in a different mode. I would say you need to go back to the manufacturer of the transition or the software creator, like Film Impact is a great one. I love that product. You just go to Film Impact site and say, what's going on with M1? Is this optimized for the M1 chip? You'll see when I try to bring up Premiere, you bring it in a mode, it'll tell you what chipset you're using. And it'll just say, Apple M1, and that is the GPU that we are driving everything to. So is that plugin optimized code-wise. And again, no different than what Larry and I have been saying the whole time. We have to optimize this to take less memory. Plugins, by the way, are notorious for grabbing lots of memory. They're also a place to check for memory leaks. So our friends over at Red Giant and Boris, amazing partners for us, they're doing a lot of overtime making sure that their plugins work as expected in After Effects and Premiere and other applications, of course. I think that's a great question, George. You just have to go to the website and see what's going to happen. And if the plugin runs, and it runs pretty decent, because a lot of them do, just keep a list of what is M1, what's not. So if you get a slowdown on the timeline, you're going to know why.
All right. So Larry, this is a big question for you, or it's a huge question. So Thunderbolt enclosures. Obviously, I have a few enclosures here. I use them, and I'm not necessarily talking about the large boxes. I'm talking about I have Blackmagic cards inside of them to I have one going through the system right now to bring in my video. So are we going to be able to update those enclosures with just a PCIe card, or do we have to do a whole revamp of all of your enclosures with new chipsets to accommodate Thunderbolt 4?
Again, Thunderbolt 4 is just building on the existing Thunderbolt 3, I'll call it ecosystem. It doesn't actually, I mean, when you're looking at storage, you can't build Thunderbolt 4 storage with the same capabilities that Thunderbolt 3 storage already provides. The products that the solutions that are currently designated Thunderbolt 4, the Thunderbolt 4 hub, the Thunderbolt 4 dock that we put out there, that's a chipset capability to provide additional ports. It's not something that applies to our Flex 8 or Thunderbays or any of our other Thunderbolt 3 solutions. We could hypothetically do a Thunderbolt 4 version of our Helios, but we'd actually have to put a tightener, put a Thunderbolt 3 chipset in it to still give the actual capability that the Helios is designed for through that PCIe slot. A Thunderbolt 4 chipset has its lanes reserved to do the switching, so you can have more ports. So it's a little confusing in terms of being a brand new named interface. They're calling it Thunderbolt 4, but really it really is still Thunderbolt 3. And all of your Thunderbolt 3 devices plug and play on anything that says it's Thunderbolt 4, work with the Thunderbolt 4 equipped hubs and docks. You don't have to replace anything. So, in terms of a card inside one of the chassis, you may upgrade your card because you want new capabilities that the current card doesn't provide. But Thunderbolt 4 and Thunderbolt 3, in and of themselves, don't affect the operation of that card. And I wanted to briefly touch on the M1 question about the two displays. If I understood correctly, if the question was about having two displays external on a MacBook Air with the M1, I'm not sure that was the question or not. The current M1s only support over Thunderbolt a single display. They don't have dual display support, so you get the built-in display on the actual laptop screen plus one additional external monitor. On the Mac Mini, you can do one display over Thunderbolt and the other display over HDMI. All the Intel Macs, by contrast, do support two displays up to 4K. On your Thunderbolt 4 ports, or on your Thunderbolt ports rather, Thunderbolt 3 ports. So we'll see what the next generation of Apple Silicon brings, but the current M1s only support a single external display via Thunderbolt.
Yeah, I think it's good to add what's going on there. That's why I sort of prefaced it by saying if the operating system can see it, the applications will see it. So there's nothing special we're doing. And Larry certainly brings up a number of good points. The M1, again, it's kind of all the same chipset, but the M1 chip is kind of a dedicated GPU. So there's only a certain amount of memory that will be pulling even from that 8 gigabyte, right? So what exactly is going on there? How is this being optimized? Again, we keep going back to that word. The software vendors have a lot of homework to do with Apple to make sure we're running in as minimal space as possible, which is only going to help us down the road when they kind of get to the next level of where their roadmap's going to take them. So I think it's important. I also think a lot of Thunderbolt, Larry kind of said it right. I think I call it Thunderbolt Plus, Thunderbolt 3 Plus. because it isn't really 4 where you would expect it to be 80, or we were always doubling numbers. It does a lot more for PC, which I think you said as well, than it does for Mac. And again, it's a lot about the cable. You can't run external GPU, as we already said. I get a lot of people asking about that. Why? Because where is the GPU driver on the M1 OS, right? So it's not there, and probably Apple's got a plan for whatever they want to do next on that, and they need to control that environment, because you want it to be steady. So anyway, it will be interesting on things like Blackmagic and AJA and Bluefish cards, how those work in those chassis. If Thunderbolt 4 gave me the ability to daisy chain, which, as I recall, Larry, was not really, the chassis sort of need to be the inline. Like some of the chassis would give us a way to daisy chain out. And I remember my friends at Intel were telling me, yeah, well, we've designed that GPU chassis should actually stop, sort of be the end of that chain. I believe your OWC chassis does that as well. It's like it only has just one Thunderbolt port on it, so you can't daisy chain off of that. If Thunderbolt 4 gave us the ability to do that because it had fatter pipes, then I would go back to Larry and say, wouldn't it be great if we could swap out the card? Like, I guess what I'm saying is I'm not so sure you need to swap anything out. Maybe you'll say, I want a Thunderbolt 4 cable. I want to make sure my cable is as good as it can be, but I don't think you're giving up anything by the Thunderbolt 3 chipset that you guys have already put in the external chassis.
No, you're correct, Dave. There's nothing you get with Thunderbolt 4 other than some new feature capabilities and some standards. In terms of the existing Thunderbolt 3 devices, they already are fully enabled, equipped, and they have capabilities from a chipset level that the new Thunderbolt 4 chipsets today can't even match. So it's not, this is a progression of the Thunderbolt 40 gigabit interface, not something new that you have to worry about replacing. Somebody last summer said, geez, I wish the Flex 8 had come out in Thunderbolt 4. It's like, well, if we did a Thunderbolt 4 version of the Flex 8, it would be about a quarter of the speed that it provides today, because that chipset only gives one lane for the actual device, and the other 3 lanes are used for switching and supporting the additional ports. As a hub, as a dock with multiple Thunderbolt ports, it's fantastic, but it doesn't actually give a benefit for an eGPU chassis or an external storage device. Even a 10 gigabit adapter, there's no reason to upgrade, switch, change. And on the cables, what you've already got connected, if it's a fixed setup, you don't need to replace cables you have. But certainly if you're on the road, if you're disconnecting, connecting things, having a Thunderbolt 4 cable, will simplify and certainly take one less, checkbox you have to worry about, off reconfiguring that setup. So it's you really,
one thing on the cables I'll bring up, Larry, I think is really important, because we haven't talked about this. What does a bad Thunderbolt connection look like? Like, I don't, but I've experienced it a dozen times where, I'll go from this Dell monitor, which has got Thunderbolt on it, and I might start daisy chaining. It's now connected to my Mac, and then I've got another drive. And what happens is my second monitor starts wigging out, starts popping black, or it might go out, it might come on. A drive may go offline, it comes up. So a lot of that, maybe Larry, you can comment on that. Maybe the cabling's helping. You're kind of reaching your saturation limit. And it depends on, is it a pass through on one side of the computer? Is it Thunderbolt A, Thunderbolt B? That's where it gets a little confusing, and you just kind of have to take a step back and go, how many ports does this Mac actually have? Because some only have one, might only have one. Certainly on the Windows side, you might get a laptop that has it, but they've only got one. It's just because it has 2 ports doesn't mean it's 2 chips. So you might mention that, and things that you guys see where Thunderbolt starts to wig out.
On multi-display setups, sometimes, again, I think the OS, has a blip, and you'll see. It's annoying. I don't know that I blame the cable when your screen starts to flash back and forth, and then after a couple cycles, then everything suddenly stabilizes all by itself. There are cases where the ports, if you have a port that's not quite super tight. If things wiggle, you're in an environment where things can be bumped. We actually have a product called the Klingon that goes over the port and lets you stabilize the connection, and that can be helpful in a lot of environments. But usually, it's daisy chaining is a headache, because if you shut down the device, depending upon what the device is, you may cut off the rest of your chain. You're also adding latency as you extend the just the length, the distance between your furthest device and the host. I mean, this is PCIe. I mean, it's originally. I mean, that's it. We're extending an interface that was designed to be inside the computer, and that is one nice thing that the Thunderbolt 4 hubs and docks provide, is the ability to direct connect, right, close to the computer versus having to daisy chain everything out. You can now have your devices, your display, and your high-speed storage, all connected close to the host, as opposed to having to extend out that chain. So those things improve the stability, reduce latency, improve performance, and even just for managing that flow, you have to disconnect and reconnect things. Or you have a bunch of bus powered devices, a lot more flexibility. On the eGPU, Thunderbolt 4 does not give you a bigger pipe. It's the same 40 gigabit pipe that we've had now since 2016 with Thunderbolt 3. The only difference is, and this is mainly for a PC, every port has to be 40 gigabit. Whereas before Thunderbolt, you may have had a PC that only had a 20 gigabit connection. And if you try to plug a display and a data device through a 20 gigabit Thunderbolt 3 port, there's not a lot of bandwidth left for that storage device.
Yeah,
The
you bring
display
up
tends to get priority.
another good point. And I don't know, do you guys make a Thunderbolt 3 to Thunderbolt 2 adapter?
We don't. We used to. Apple makes a
Apple makes
bidirectional
the
adapter,
best. That was going to be my
Absolutely.
comment. I've tested a dozen of the ones you can get on Amazon. They all go back, and I tried at least 5 different kinds over the years. And I tell PC or Mac, it doesn't make any difference. You just buy the Apple one because it works every time. What I have found is the bidirectional on some of the cheaper ones just doesn't work right.
Right.
And Apple, I know it's $40 or whatever, it's expensive, but it works. So I thought I'd throw
we
that
made
out
a
there.
cable. We never made a bidirectional adapter. We made a Thunderbolt 3 to Thunderbolt 2 cable, which 100% of the time works. And actually, we're still trying to come up with a way to finagle getting our Thunderbolt 2 to 3 technology, or 3 to 2 technology into one of our new docks. But I mean, there's still a lot of Thunderbolt 2 devices out there, but I'm not aware of anything certified out there that is bidirectional other than Apple. Apple is the only manufacturer to have an approved bidirectional TB3 to TB2 and vice versa. And I put one other warning again, not to Amazon is a great resource, but there's not a lot of policing on Amazon, and it's frustrating for us as a Thunderbolt solutions manufacturer to see a lot of things on Amazon advertised as Thunderbolt that aren't, or advertised as Thunderbolt and somehow they got chipsets and it's not a certified solution.
Or they
should
say they're
definitely.
certified, but you're not, right?
They act like they are. They say they are, and it's like no, And on a daily basis, our team's reporting different finds out to Intel, and it's. I certainly would like to see less of that stuff out there because it makes some of the things are embarrassing. I mean, the specs are all wrong. I mean, there's a Thunderbolt 3 device, something with a Thunderbolt 3 chipset listed that was being advertised as Thunderbolt 4 that was going to do all these amazing things. It's like, there's no way those chipsets even work together, what they're describing. And it's bad for us, it's bad because somebody gets something they think is a Thunderbolt device and it doesn't perform. It makes the entire ecosystem more
Dave, I
questionable.
want to make sure. Oh, sorry, Larry. Didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay.
So Dave,
everything else.
It's a great topic. I know we need to get off.
Trust because it's
we'll be back again. Don't worry. So Dave, let me cut to this hero shot. I want you to go ahead and share your screen and let's get into it. What you going to show
tell me
us?
if that's sharing okay. I'm going to minimize.
Yes,
this
you're
screen.
sharing okay.
Okay, I'm going to run this because my Mac Mini's over here. So I'm a big Splash Top user. Great product. And let me know if that comes up okay. Can you see that machine okay?
Yes.
Perfect.
You might want to turn it into full screen so we can see more of it.
Let's see if that. How's that?
Yep, it's good.
Perfect. So I'll just bring up Premiere. We won't get into transcription today, but would love to come back, George, another time and go through transcription. It's
Yes, please.
It's a lot of fun. So if I just come in here, these are my friends at GoPro. This is the launch of the GoPro Hero 9. It works great, but what you really want to see when you bring up the activity monitor, I'm going to give you a peek, by the way, of the new export window that will be coming out. So we're doing some redesign And if I come in here and I just say, well, I want to, make an H.265 out of that and whatever settings I need, and I hit export, the biggest thing I want to watch is I just want to watch. See how this says Apple M1? That is the chip that it detects. What you really want to see is you want to see this right here. We are pushing, again, Apple has been with us side by side, lockstep, helping us out with these optimizations. I am in love with the fact that we are just slamming this GPU, because that's what people want to see. They're like, okay, I have this honking GPU. Show me this. Yes, we're continuing to work on the other GPUs as well, and actually have taken those pretty far. You can see that CPU's doing some work on these ladder threads here, but I just thought I'd share that, because to me, this is the big one, that we are using those particular resources in the way that they should be used. So with that, I'll come back to you, and I just wanted to share that, George. Let me just turn this screen off, put that back on me, and we can certainly take any questions. I was trying to keep that short and sweet, but we are working as hard as we can to make sure the entire program works that way. And also working with guys like Larry's, engineers on any of the RAID drivers we're trying to test, because Lord knows we have lots of RAIDs that we're always putting through the paces and eagerly awaiting for Thunderbolt RAID drivers and things like that. So trying to test a full workflow in and out. So I hope that at least gets people enticed to download the beta.
Excellent. We don't have a ton of questions left. So
Great.
I mean, we already covered what's the difference between Thunderbolt. Larry, you guys are on a serious march with Thunderbolt docks. What can we expect? I mean, you've got so much on the table right now. What can we expect moving down the line?
Well, we listen to our customers, so as long as we get feedback, you can expect what's next will fit the needs that are ever evolving. Ports, more capabilities, and certainly designing around what the next generation Apple Silicon machines look to demand. And I want to add about the Apple Silicon. The M1s, I mean, amazing machines. Apple positioned them as the low end, the entry point in all their lineups with the Intel systems above. And I got to wonder if everybody in Apple even fully recognize just how powerful these machines were going to be out of the gate, and the run for the money that they've given even these higher end systems Apple still offers today that cost quite a bit more. There's still some questions to be answered. Some of the things with memory. Will we have external GPU support? But I'll be honest. I mean, I personally, unless I had to have a machine today, I'd be waiting for Apple's next Silicon, to see what's next. If not an M1, whatever the next MX processor is, it's going to be a really exciting path forward. And it's the first time really since the PowerPC that somebody's given Intel a real run for the money. And M1 in performance, in power efficiency, battery life as a result in the laptops is just an incredible platform that out of the gate is certainly far exceeded everything we expected. And it's
I think the launch was amazing, Larry, just to your point, right? I mean, they did an amazing job of just firing on all cylinders. I mean, again, we're all technologists here and futurists, and I'm just like, I got to hand it to them, because I would have never expected this to be as successful as it was right from the get-go. You get a little bumps here and there. It's all software, but the bumps weren't that big. They were pretty easy to overcome, and in most cases some pretty good workarounds. So hats off. Apple did an amazing job, and it's continuing to do so.
So Larry, quick
agreed 100%.
Larry, question for you. So obviously Blackmagic, we're pretty much done with the core things that we came to talk about. These questions I have. So the Envoy Express, my Caribbeanness. Are you testing with the ATM Mini ISOs? Obviously, everyone is using these little drives to record directly to it. Are you guys testing the Envoy Express to see if you can use it with the ATM Mini ISO or now the Extreme for recording?
And Larry, I'll just
The,
say I'm a card-carrying member here, so
Greatly apprecited. The Envoy, the Pro Minis, the Envoy, the new Electron, which is that really small. I mean, it's the size of a credit card, up to 2 terabytes. Waterproof, and I mean, literally run it over with a tank, and your data's still safe. Those products all work with USB-C, and absolutely should have no issue with the Black Magic. I want to say we're testing. I would have come in with it an absolute answer, but I know we had the Black Magics in house, and the Type C we're absolutely fully compatible. Our Envoy Pro FX, which goes from a USB, works with both USB and Thunderbolt systems, is in the same boat, and I'm really excited. I mean, it's for all computer kind. That device works, with a Mac or a PC. Go back a decade with USB 3 Type A, all the way, and that'll whatever the maximum speed of that interface, so 500 megabytes a second, more or less, with on a decade-old system, to 2,800 megabytes a second on the latest Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4 machines. It's got total universality to take advantage of whatever your host is, and really easy also to move data back and forth between multiple PCs and even Macs. Mac Drive makes it very easy to automatically mount Apple volumes on your PC Windows system. So for those with a mixed environment, and that goes for software as well, we've made it very, very easy to have interoperability, between machines of different generations, hardware-wise, as well as OS, Windows and Mac operating systems on different hardware, all at the same time.
I can't say enough about that Thunderblade. I know I have to part with it soon here in a couple of days, but I'm gonna have my own coming back soon. I use it on a project, and that thing is a screamer. I actually gave it to the guys on show site to load some media on it, and they had an older drive. And once I gave them that Thunderblade, they're like, "What the heck?" The speeds are ridiculous.
And it's also small to fit in your laptop case, right? It's
Yes.
skinny, small. Yeah. I think it's 16 terabytes. We've used them as well. So,
well, 16 terabytes. I only have the 4, but it's still a screamer.
Yeah, I think we've got the 8
32.
Now 32.
Wow.
That product. Yeah, we designed that product to be able to do video editing, on the road, and it ended up being an ingest tool, a duplication transport tool. It just saves so much time, whether you're doing processing work or need to get data duplicated and shipped off. It's just
working
fast,
on dailies, right? If you're on working on TV shows and things like that, you got to get those dailies moved around. That's a great way to do it.
Yeah, I actually had it on the desk, and everyone that passed by is like, "What is that?" You have to give them. It's a hard drive. It's a different hard drive.
It looks pretty slick too. I mean, we like the design.
So, look, before we wrap up, there's a lot going on in the industry. I think the latest, the folks over at Frame.io really, I wouldn't say they turned the industry upside down, but definitely they're adding some major value to how production is going to be done. And I mean, Larry obviously
did a great job. It was very impressive.
Again, your drives. I mean, that survey went out a few years ago when you were looking at creators and saying, "Hey, what do you guys want from us?" And I have to say this to you all the time. You guys leapfrog bounds in a short period of time and really delivering some products that folks are really using on big production. And I think it's good to see Frame.io and all of these companies. And the good news is it's not only for big production houses. Guys like myself are going to be able to utilize that technology to get our work done. We were just talking about it on the Office Hours Discord. Frame.io. If you don't have Frame.io in your kit right now, something is wrong.
Yeah, true.
And I would add LumaForge with the Jellyfish and LumaForge. I mean, we're from an A to Z perspective. Frame.io absolutely. All of these things complement each other and improve everybody's ability to have a workflow that works for them. I would argue that the pandemic pushed a lot of the needs forward much faster and illustrating areas that we could take advantage of technology to keep getting things done and do things better, and regardless of whether we're in a lockdown or not, which fortunately, hopefully, we're pretty well at the end of.
So we didn't. The conversation that we came to had wasn't based on the Jellyfish, but And I know you can't really tell us what the plans are for it. Can you give us a little bit of insight, or you don't have to give everything away, but what are your plans for LumaForge Jellyfish?
The entire LumaForce team has been integrated into OWC, with rare exception. Now, there's no, well, how do I say this? There's, of course, there's a plan, but in terms of what that team has brought forward and what Jellyfish has become, I mean, the plan is simply to continue to take it forward. We have our Jupyter side. I mean, it accelerates capabilities, in an area that we already have a presence, and we have the ability to quickly accelerate and move LumaForce forward as well. It's a great team. It's a great product, and the plan is simply to continue to make it better and bring their plan, as well as their own plan, which we're pretty darn parallel, into fruition as quickly as possible, so that everybody can benefit from it as quick as possible.
Dave, obviously, there's this global, huge. There's Premiere Pro and its sister apps, brother apps. There is DaVinci Resolve. They're all maturing. Blackmagic is maturing as they're doing their thing on the hardware side, and NLE. There's Final Cut Pro X. What do we see? What is? I know your roadmap, but what can we see coming from Premiere Pro? They're just tools for me. I just use Premiere Pro on a really large project. I honestly don't think I could have done that work that I needed to do with any other NLE other than Premiere Pro. And that's not to say anything else is bad. I use Resolve also, but Premiere Pro is just it's a Leatherman.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for us, we're looking at lots of the problems that are out there. Certainly remote worker, cloud connectivity, collaboration with things like team projects and productions, which we're using on major movies. Like we just finished Terminator, the last Terminator Dark Fate was all done. Testing out Premiere Pro Productions, which is a way that we could have multiple editors, all on the same project at the same time for very, very large projects. Team projects, which use the cloud to bounce project changes back and forth. What can we do to help media get to where it needs to get to? So I won't tell you too much there, but we certainly see that this moving of files around, whether it's OneDrive, Dropbox, these types of products, or even Creative Cloud, there's always a file that's missing when you update a project. Is there anything we can do just to make that easier? So looking at a lot of these problems, what can we do if I want to share the output of my screen to your iPhone 12? Maybe you've got an iPhone 12 there, George, and it's HDR. Can I use a technology like a streaming technology called SRT might be one example. Are there things we can do, or can we work with partners to ensure that these types of technologies get out there for remote editing? Because remember, not everybody that needs to approve work knows their way around a timeline. So when you were at a place like NBC or CNN or Fox or any of these places, you've got people in the editing area that will come over your shoulder, or you've got a producer with a clipboard looking at all the things you're editing. Obviously, the same thing goes for Hollywood. We're no longer in the same room. How do we pull everybody into the same room? The way we're doing it on Zoom right now, and sharing screens and people having to load additional software, it is just a pain in the neck to get everybody in sync. And a lot of the people that have to approve are not technology people like the three of us sitting here and many of the people listening today. How can we make that easier? And then lastly, I already talked about performance as being a major thing for us right now, just really kicking it up a notch. Premiere is so much faster this year, 12 months than it was 12 months ago. But also, what can we do to make the programs communicate more efficiently back and forth? Things like dynamic link and other types of technology. So, tons of things that we're working on, George. So the roadmap is bright, and I'll end with one thing that I'm most impressed about: looking at the UI and making sure things are discoverable and in front of you. without having to have a friend at Adobe, because Lord knows, you can call me anytime, buddy. You know that. You too, Larry. If you get stuck, just give me a buzz. I'll tell you your way around. But the fact that you have to reach out or go check a YouTube video, we're really taking a close look at how can we make the applications more intuitive and more discoverable. So I hope that answers the question.
For sure. Let me just say, before, I know we're going over a little bit, but it's okay. We like to talk, and I know both of you guys enough to say we love to chat. So you mentioned a couple of things that kind of set my head. SRT. Obviously, right now, I am doing this show using vMix, just another tool, a Windows tool in the pot. You said SRT, and that right away, I think it'll be a great idea if Premiere Pro and its sister apps are outputting SRT. Right now, I can bring.
We should clarify that SRT can also be confused with captions. SRT
Right.
is a streaming technology,
Yes.
not the
Yes.
captions. I just want to
Not
be clear
caption.
because it is confusing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So vMix does SRT well. There's so much going on, and I keep bugging Larry about when he's going to bring out a cloud.
I've got a beta plugin you can play with, George, if you want to check it out.
Yes, I keep bugging Larry about having a cloud product. I am actually doing the show from a PC here in the lab, but most of my work for the past couple of weeks have been on AWS. I'm spinning up the same machines on AWS. I have about 12 machines on AWS right now that I'm doing a lot of my production work for clients, and that helps with overhead, and it also helps that I don't have to worry about things crashing or bandwidth or any of those kind of issues. The cloud is where we're going. So again, Premiere Pro being able to bring an SRT feed into vMix, it helps push what we're doing right now as an industry, and I'm happy with the space we're in. I always said to folks, I'm happy to be working in the production industry and the live production industry. And it's all coming together right now, of the whole larger ecosystem of being able to move media across the planet or across the world, in less latency and so forth. So SRT will be a big deal, being added into Premiere Pro or any NLE right now.
Yeah, and again, I should just stipulate that we're looking at all the different technologies, and if anybody wants to see what we're talking about, there's a company called Hivision,
Yep.
and HAI, right? You can go to Apple's App Store on your iPhone or iPad, and just download the Hivision app, and you'll see what we're talking about. It is a player that with a partner I'm working with right now, I should point that out. It's a partner I'm working with right now. You're in Premiere, much like you might do with NDI, because NDI is another great way to do it. It's just that SRT supports 10-bit and 16 channels of audio, which is amazing, right? So a lot of these technologies will have to stereo mix down and only give you 8-bit. It just depends on the tech. And these things are changing. So I think the real thing for the audience to know is we're trying to solve the problem of how do I share my screen, play it back in full quality on the device that they have in their office, whether it be a OLED TV, connected to the internet and it's got HDR in it. Can I get a feed there? Is there an app that'll run on that? Some of these TVs have browsers built in, those types of things. So there's a lot of these things that we have to kind of connect, but we're trying to solve how do we all work together at the same time. That's the real problem, and SRT just happens to be one of the technologies I'm working with right now with a partner. So,
excellent, Larry. What's next for you before David's given his piece? What's Larry and OWC?
Well, again, the LumaForge and Jellyfish certainly give us the local collaboration. Cloud is a huge part of our future, and the great thing is software is going to enable the cloud capabilities that we bring forth. First with LumaForce and Jupyter, higher end product, and then even products that are sitting at your desk today, like the Thunderbay and the Thunderblade. So certainly, it's a big future piece of the equation that we're going to enable multiple location syncing, use of the interface with the cloud, so that you have the ability, to have your files, your output shared, and even bring things down automatically as you edit, produce, etc. But focus on the future. Focus is really on the software. I mean, hardware has been front and center for OWC for pretty much the 3+ decades that we've been out there, and software over the last decade. What's been really kind of behind the scenes and under the hood, we haven't put a lot of light on. Over the next couple of years, even throughout this year, you're going to see a lot more coming forth, a lot more information, a lot more capability in our software products. Because it really is the case that the software that we provide with our solutions, even today, is what differentiates them and makes them, a step above, everything else that I would call the rest. And most important as we move forward with all of our solutions is that these are things that auto-configure, plug and play. They're very easy to use so that you can get on with your creative work, get on with your day without having to think about the hardware. We really want to be the solutions that you can almost forget about, because once you've connected them, they're just there so that you can get everything you need to have done, and put that energy into the creative process, not worrying about how to configure something or what needs to be connected. It's plug and play and go, and the same will be with the cloud side of the equation.
And hey, George, that does remind me that coming up in the next couple of weeks, Jason Levine, who I know you know, he and I will be teaming up on his channel. And he goes out on streams on Facebook, YouTube, and a bunch of other social apps. And we're going to be holding a masterclass on remote editing. 12 months later, where are we? What are the tools that are out there? My task for the team that I work on now is I'm sort of the guy for Strat Dev that runs Cloud Edit. So it takes up about 90% of my day. So we've got great solutions like, Lucid Link. Obviously you had already talked about partners at AWS, Azure, all these other places. But if you want to remain on your Mac and you want to use your M1, how do I connect to a cloud NAS? What does that look like? It's as little as $12 a month per terabyte. It's amazingly inexpensive. So we're going to get into this in a lot of detail in this masterclass. So Jason and I are working on putting some of that together right now. So we'll make sure you get that info so you can pass it on.
Excellent. So before I wrap up, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of housekeeping. Obviously, Larry is here. Dave is here. Larry, thank you very much for being a sponsor of District Digital Creatives. Obviously, Adobe for their continued support. Imagine Products, which is another sponsor of DDC, and of course, Blackmagic. This is our first stream of 2021. Things look good. Obviously, I never wanted to do a stream unless I could do it right. And I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, and it's annoying at times, but I'm glad to be doing this stream. Look for more DDC Lives coming up. I'm not going to say every week, but we're always online, so we're definitely going to be having our guests from the industry. I think, guys, we had a good conversation. Obviously, we went over half an hour, which is not a big deal. It's not like we're going anywhere right this second.
Not unexpected.
I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come in and have a chat with DDC. And I look forward to chatting with you all again sooner than later. Larry, we have a conversation we need to have about SSD in depth. So we need to have that soon than later also. Maybe we'll have Dave back. We'll have Dave back again for a chat.
By the way, I should point out just a funny note that my Twitter handle is not mine. That's my son. So he's a pilot for a major airline. So you're probably going to be talking to the wrong. He's a junior. So it's D Helmly 3 at Twitter. So just wanted to point that out.
But don't worry. I think that
a lot of people.
I think it's only on the stories, so the story is just going to fade away. So don't worry.
He was the one that was texting me over here. He goes, "What's going on?"
Not a problem. Hey, why don't I do a quick check before we roll out to make sure I didn't have any questions come in. Oh, here we go. We have a question. Do I under correctly the Thunderbolt 4 cables fit any USB port? So many USB device will work with a Thunderbolt 4 cable. Do I understand correctly that Thunderbolt 4 cables fit any USB port? USB-C port. So many USB device will work with a Thunderbolt 4 cable. Larry, did you decipher that?
As long as it's a USB-C port, if it's the cable where you can plug it in, there's no upside down because it's the same on both sides. If it's a USB-C cable or a USB-C device, a Thunderbolt 4 cable it's the same port. I mean, and yes, it will fit and work 100% of the time.
And I do apologize for the beginning of the show. A little bit of music is still playing while Larry was talking. As you can see, doing a show and being the host and switching is not always fun. So I apologize for the little bit of music that was over Larry's voice. I promise it won't happen again. Larry, Dave, it's always great chatting with you. I know we can't be in person, but I think being online is a lot of fun also, and we're going to make use of this space.
Great.
Great. Thanks for having us, George.
So stand by. Don't go away yet, guys. I'm just going to
Continue,
end the show and come back in the back end. All right?